We have 24 supervisors present. That is a quorum. I will call us to order and invite those who choose to join in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the January 15th, 2015 meeting of the La Crosse County Board of Supervisors. Our first item of business is to hear from our county clerk on a housekeeping matter.
This is just a reminder for anybody that turns in mileage reimbursement. If you're turning in any 2014 mileage reimbursement, it needs to be turned in by January 30th to my office. When you turn that in, please also make sure you have an updated declaration of insurance on file so we can get those processed in a timeline so we can close out the 2014 books. Also a reminder that you do have lockers back there, and as I was putting some mail in there tonight, there seem to be some that are getting full. So take a minute to clean out your lockers and throw away some of the garbage back there. Thank you.
Recycling bins are at each of the doors if you need to use them. Thank you. Any questions of the clerk on mileage? If not, Corporation Counsel Dave Lang has a couple of items for board education.
Good evening, everybody. Because of some of the issues that have come up, it seemed like a good time to address some issues that come up once in a while, like how do matters get on the county board? How do we deal with a minority report that happens once in a while? It doesn't happen that often, but it's good to know. And maybe talk about referendum and what authority we have as a county and exactly how does that work? And we can use the registration fee ordinance as sort of an example. So you should have a sheet that was handed out. It should be the gold-colored sheet. And the first page is just placement on county board agenda. And we have a couple of ordinances that apply. One deals with resolutions. That's the first one, 2.027C. And basically that says they are submitted to the appropriate standing committee prior to introduction to the county board. That's how it almost always happens. I mean, that's how we do it. But there is another provision there that says unless the county board chair authorizes the placement of a resolution directly on the county board agenda, and then the majority vote of the members present must vote to suspend the rules before the resolution is discussed or voted on by the board. So there's a check on there that basically says if the majority of the board says we don't want to hear it, then you don't hear it. But if you do, then something can be placed on the board agenda without going through a standing committee. And once in a while that's kind of helpful because you may have something that comes up that's an emergency between the standing committees and the board meeting a week later that you feel really needs to get on the board agenda. So there is a way to do that through the county board chair. The section 2.02 parent 8B talks about ordinances, and those also are reviewed by the originating standing committee. And after review, the ordinance is placed on the agenda if recommended by a majority of the committee, and that does refer to or by a minority report. That's the only time that our ordinances even refer to a minority report. So that's where we kind of have to look to Robert's Rules of Order for how do we deal with minority reports. And that's the second page that you have. So really, there's three options. One is reviewed by a standing committee prior to introduction to the county board. If it's passed by the standing committee, it comes to the county board, and that's how, 99% of the time, that's how resolutions, ordinances get to this body. And that allows it to be, it's been passed by another committee. It's been debated, it's been passed. So that's how the vast majority of them get to the county board. The second one I have down is the minority report, and I'll go over that procedure, which is the next page that you have. And the third way is by the county board chair placing a resolution directly on the county board agenda, and then there has to be a majority vote to suspend the rules and hear it. So those are really the three ways that resolutions or ordinances can get before this body. Let's talk about any questions before I go forward anymore. I just want to talk about minority reports, and frankly, I got to give a little credit to Bill Shepard, my predecessor, because he had this one, and I had done another one, and I thought this was better, so I used this. And as the introduction states in the minority reports, it's only mentioned in our ordinances under the section regarding ordinances, and it doesn't say how it works. It just says it can be a minority report. And our past practice is we allow them rarely for resolutions or ordinances that fail. The general rule is that a minority report is a report from a committee that does not agree with the majority of that committee. And the presentation is a privilege granted by the county board, not a matter of right. And you'll see how that is when you look at the procedure. It's a little bit different. First of all, the procedure is this. A committee member in the majority gives the committee report. It's brief. The resolution failed. So just stating the resolution, it failed in committee. So that's the majority report. Then the chair notifies the board that a supervisor wishes to present a minority report. The chair asks if there is an objection. If no one raises an objection, then the supervisor can give the minority report. Supervisor, or it could be another supervisor, if you want to defer to someone else to do it, gives the minority report. If an objection is raised, now here I'm going to make a change. You're going to get this in an email with an updated one where it says minority supervisor makes motion. I look back in Robert's rules, and it's really the chair simply presents the question. So just cross that out and put chair presents question. Should the minority report be received? It just means should it be heard, or you could say should the minority report be heard. And then it's undebatable and majority vote. If it's voted down, the minority report dies. If it's voted up, or if there is no objection, then we go to the minority report, and then it's treated just like it was as if it was put on the agenda. The supervisor makes the motion to pass it. If it's seconded, then it's heard and it's debated, and just like any other resolution or ordinance. So that's how that works. So it's a little bit different in the sense that first there's a majority report. There's a chance for the board to say, do we want to hear this or not? That's your chance. And then if it is heard, then you go to the last step. So that's how it works. And I would keep that because then if it ever comes up again, you can say, well, this is how it's supposed to work. The only last thing I want to talk to you briefly is about advisory and contingent referenda. I didn't say binding, I said contingent because that's all that's allowed by state statute. We don't have a situation where we have bonds, and I refer to that in the third paragraph, certain bonding situations where it needs to be approved by referendum. What we have is a statute that says that the board may conduct a county-wide referendum either for advisory purposes or for the purpose of ratifying or validating a resolution adopted or ordinance enacted by the board contingent upon approval in the referendum. So basically you have to pass something to become law, a resolution or an ordinance, and then say it's contingent upon approval in a referendum for it to be a contingent referendum. And the other situation is advisory. And I will tell you that in my research, advisory referendum is much more common. I asked around with the other state corporation councils on the listserv that we have, and I had very few responses when I asked them about contingent referendums. I wanted to see what procedure do you follow? What do you use? Almost no responses. So it's very rarely that those happen. Having advisory referendums sometimes about either county issues or state issues or federal issues to find out how the populace thinks about it, those are much more common, but not very common contingent. I just didn't find a lot on that. So if you look down at the outline, as I indicated, the most common usage is by advisory referendums. The form is normally by resolution, and you also need to detail the question because we need to know what question is going to be on there. We don't want to get into a debate about that or leave it up to Jenny and I to try to do it. The question is put in the resolution. It has to be filed with the official preparing the ballots with the clerk no later than 70 days prior to the election. So there's a time limit, and now we'll explain how that works here. And then looking at this case of the annual vehicle registration fee, it means that the second reading would need to be deferred until after the spring election because you don't want to pass a resolution and you're having a referendum on it. So if we had the ordinance, the first reading today, and let's say you voted yes to an advisory referendum, then I would say you would have to refer this matter until the April meeting, the second reading of the ordinance, because because you're going to want to look at it after the vote. That's the purpose for having the referendum, so you have input. It also means that in this case, you would have to change the effective date of the ordinance, so it would have to be changed to August 1st, 2015, because it has to be enacted at least 90 days prior to when it can be effective, because you send it into the state, and they're saying you need 90 days before it's effective. So it's a little bit different in this case with this registration fee. Normally, an ordinance is effective right away. You pass it, you publish it, it's effective. This one isn't. So this is a kind of a complicated one. What happens if it's contingent? As I indicated, these do not happen often. The procedure would be, and I think there's a couple of different ways it could be done, but normally I think what you would do is you would pass the ordinance, and on section 2 we always indicate when it's effective, and you could put in there, in that area you could put in, it's only effective if ratified by a referendum using this question at the next election, and you would state the question. You could do it that way, or you could pass a resolution at the same time that basically said the same thing. So there's more than one way to do it if you wanted to do that. That's my opinion. Some other council might have a different opinion, but I think there's more than one way to skin the cat to do that. But here's the other kicker is if you want to do a contingent referendum, it still has to be enacted at least 70 days prior to the April election, which means it would have to be enacted this month. It's a first reading this month, so that means that you would have to suspend the rules by a 2/3 vote to make it a second reading at this meeting. This is if you did a contingent. And then if it was passed at this meeting contingent upon passing the referendum, then you could be referred to the April election. This is if you want it on the April election. And again, you would have to change the effective date again to be August, because it would have to be still 90 days past April, because it's not going to be effective unless ratified by the referendum. So I know that's a lot to throw at you, but it just shows how it's a good example of looking at, in this case, how an advisory would work and how a contingent would work with this question that we have. If you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can come up to me later and ask me. But I just think it's a good way of explaining how it's different with this case scenario that we have.
So thank you, Dave, this is a couple of items that don't come before us very often, and I think as we have a track record of doing, we want to take advantage of a teachable moment to make sure that everybody on the board understands the procedures and remind all of us of what our ordinances call for. So, Supervisor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make this quick, I hope. In terms of open meetings laws and proper notice of the agenda of the meeting, how does that interact with like a minority report being put onto the agenda? Is it, let's say I want to offer a minority report, should I contact the chair ahead of time and put it like as a tentative placeholder on the agenda for the board meeting? How would that work?
Yeah, I think you have to have it on the agenda because you have to comply with the open meetings law. So I think if you're one who thinks that you might be in the minority, it would be good to alert the county board chair and the county clerk that you would like to see this on as a minority report. And I mean, in this case, we had the meeting the same time as county board, so we had to know in advance. But normally you would know because, the committee meetings happen a week before county board, so you'd have time. And then you could always do an amended agenda.
And then move on to this contingent referendum. If the contingent referendum passes for an ordinance, I mean, we had some issues up in Holman about a binding referendum on the issue of fluoride in the water. And it seemed to be in some of their discussions it was only binding upon that village board at that time regarding their policies. And so I wonder about when you say contingent, and when I hear that word, I hear binding. Is it binding upon just the body that's in office at that time, or the elected body at that time, or it's an ordinance, so it's in the ordinances, and if it passes with that contingent referendum, then it's law?
Just before Mr. Lang answers, just of note, he is not the legal counsel for the Village of Holman. I'm not being facetious either. I mean that. So there's different interpretations, and there might be different ordinances at the village level.
I understand
but
that. It's just.
I'm just for the record noting that.
I think when the public hears the word contingent or binding, and they felt, I think in '98 up in Holman that was binding, and then other decisions were made through emergency meetings to pull back off of that decision. That was kind of concerning and questioning. So I'm coming from that land where binding sometimes means binding and sometimes apparently not.
Okay. Well, this isn't binding. The contingent, I mean, if it passes, if it's ratified, it becomes law, so that it's done. So I think you're talking about what happens in the other case if it's not ratified, then the ordinance fails. I don't think there's anything that prevents it from coming up again. It's just that it's more the political will at that point. So.
Thank you very much.
Anything else for Dave right now on these two board education items? I heard him offer to answer questions ongoing, also not if one occurs to you later. All right, thank you, Dave, very much. That takes us on to County Board Chair Report. Just a reminder that today was the deadline, I think, for signing up for the legislative exchange that's in Madison at the beginning of February. So I guess that means we still have 5.5 hours to notify Alice of your intent to attend that. So just a friendly reminder about that. And then once we know who all is attending, we might, Alice will be the person to help coordinate ride sharing and who you room with and that kind of stuff. So if you plan to attend the WCA Legislative Exchange, please make sure right now on your computer, if you haven't already, that you let Alice know that you intend to do that. So send her an email, please. Second, any questions on that first? If not, second item is the expectations of the what I hope we will form as the Admin Center and Downtown Campus Construction Committee. So this is a resolution before us later this evening. Assuming that we pass that and form this committee, there's a green form on your desk. If you're interested in serving as a member of that committee, I've tried to outline expectations and time frame for that committee. And then if you would fill that form out and get it back to me, there's quite a bit of work to do to get us through all of the next couple of years as we implement the move over to Associated. So any questions on this expectation sheet or interest sheet? We can debate it also when the resolution comes up, but I wanted to make sure that everybody was clear. This is an important responsibility. It will require quite a bit of work over the next couple of years. Any questions on that? Again, so pending approval of that resolution, if you're interested, fill that out, please, and get it back to me. Any supervisor conference reports or announcements? Supervisor Ebert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Lake Neshonoc Rehabilitation District meeting met, and at that point there's two items that they would like to work with the county. One would be increase the parking at the South Landing, and the other one would be rickrack on the, or rickrack, whatever, new rocks on the west end. And I spoke with Mr. Spropoulos before I brought it up, but I think that's two things that they would be interested in working with the county on. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Was there an event today that you wanted to
share with the
also,
group? Yes, I was able to attend a gentleman graduated from drug court. And during the presentation, Judge Horn recognized me because I happened to be in the audience, as the county board has been very supportive of that. And I told him I would certainly pass that on to all the board members who've been supportive of this program. And it's been, I think, pretty successful. So, and I thank you, Madam Chair, for reminding me of that.
Thank you. Supervisor Paff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last two days here, Tuesday and Wednesday, I attended the winter road school for the highway committee at Wisconsin Dells, and it was a good session. A good session. On the first day, our Secretary of Transportation Gottlieb spoke to us, and he had not a lot of good news on respect of what the highway situation is and where the funding will be coming from. And this was on Tuesday before the governor's. He was somewhat thinking that the governor may be bringing something to his State of the Union or State of the State address, but evidently he didn't. And we discussed different things of the pros and cons of how to raise funds for highways, which all of us know, and we are aware of the fact that it's the money is dwindling. And he talked about somewhat the pros and cons of tolling or charging vehicle fees on the side. So it was interesting, and that pretty much wrapped up as far as there was a question or two regular gas tax, which you know has not been indexed since 2004, and he couldn't answer any questions like that. Have to see what, and didn't know if there was the appetite for it right now. But anyway, moving along then, later on that afternoon, our representative to NACO, which is our legislative arm that the counties belong to, all county highways more or less belong to. It's just a lobbying arm organization, 1,900 members, and they cover, let's see, 1.74 million miles, 231,000 bridges in the United States. But anyway, what he talked about more or less was where we're going and what we can do, and that we have to continue to be a part of that. It was interesting, but it's more or less on the federal level, but that's for the ones that are in the department there to be working with. And then later on, Ann Richards from the chief of the budget and policy development section in the state of Wisconsin, she talked about where we were with the budget, the highway budget. Well, we took she showed us the pie, and what slice of the pie goes for each thing. And the problem is the pie is not big enough for everyone to get a decent slice. We need a bigger pie. But anyway, what they talked about was there was the highway fund itself. Right at this point, out of that pie, 17% goes to debt service. This is a real problem. That's where working with the highways here, with the maintenance and on down the road here, there's a lot of challenges coming forward. And if something isn't done, raising more funds, it will depend more upon the local governments to take care of their county roads, and it's kind of a timely thing what we was talking about down there. But if nothing's done in the next 2 years, that slice of the pie with the rising debt could raise to as much as 22% of the entire budget of the highway departments. But this was anyway. I say it was an interesting. Just to sum it up here quick for everyone, our WCA chairman right now is Emmer Shields. I can add this here and there right now that next year is when our very own Ron Chamberlain moves up, because he is the secretary now, and then he will be the chairman beginning next year. And that's congratulations to him. And he was there and he's on the boards there now. But anyway, he ran a few other open sessions. In what Emmer Shields really said is they were open. What he's been talking to his people is supporting any type of revenue source to help out the county roads. In closing, what he was saying is and when you talk to different constituents and different people, and when you talk to your own county board, what he was saying is they all seem to have concerns for, and they all support to say that roads and maintenance needs to be done, but then as soon as you ask them what can be done, they all agree that something needs to be done, but as soon as anything like a fee or a tax is added, then they're not being totally honest with you that things, when they say they want good roads, do they really mean it, or are they not honest in the fact that they want to pay for them? But anyway, that was just it was a very interesting one thing we do have going for us, just to close out here, is fuel here. Even in we all know that the diesel fuel has dropped too, so we're buying diesel fuel at a cheaper rate, but that doesn't really translate very fast into the heavy number 5 fuel for repaving roads. This doesn't happen quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Paff. Other conference or meeting reports? Supervisor Jerome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to talk about that the city of La Crosse had an open house today for 5 new homes that have replaced dilapidated housing in the Powell, Polk, Hamilton, Washburn, and Lower North Side neighborhoods. Some of these homes were built with Western Wisconsin technical student labor, and all of them are targeted for low to moderate income families. This is just one part of neighborhood revitalization that is currently being undertaken by the city, and I did tour these homes today. They're very nicely done, and it's an exciting new prospect for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Jerome. Other conference reports or meetings? Supervisor Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I brought this up twice already. The rest of my fellow supervisors are going to get sick of hearing it, but I promise this will probably be the last time. Jim Neeson from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is retiring. They're having a little get-together for him Friday evening from 5 to 8 p.m. The second floor banquet hall, 207 Pearl Street. I believe I sent an email to all of you regarding that. And for those of you that know Jim, I can't encourage you enough that I think you should attend. Thank you.
That's Friday the 23rd, right? Not this Friday, but next Friday. Is that correct?
Friday, January 23rd. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Any other conference or meeting reports, announcements? If not, Mr. O'Malley. I was ready to move on to the agenda. Mr. O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Because we didn't have a policy planning meeting, the proclamation for the month got held over to this meeting. Our proclamation is on Highway and Safety Transportation Month, January 2015, where staff works diligently to build safe roads for the residents of La Crosse and visitors to travel upon. Maintenance such as snow plowing, salting, grading shoulders, mowing, repairing, sealing, sweeping, and paving roads, and many other duties that keep La Crosse County highways clean and safe. Now, therefore, be it resolved, La Crosse County Board does hereby proclaim the month of January 2015 as La Crosse County Highway Safety Month and urges all residents to join in recognizing the valuable contribution of persons dedicated to ensuring safe roads for La Crosse County residents and visitors.
Supervisor Geary moves approval of that proclamation, seconded by Supervisor Doyle. Discussion on the proclamation. All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Back to you, Mr. O'Malley.
The next item I have is my recommendation to ask for your approval of my appointment of Sarah Spa as our next health director. After over 30 years with Doug Mormon being our health director, we're lucky enough to have Doug stick with us for another 3 months and help make that transition. But I publicly want to thank the members of the Health and Human Services Board, the County Board Chair, and members of the community that have helped me arrive at this moment to bring you Sarah Spa as our next health director with your approval. Sarah's worked for us, if you haven't read some of the articles and the monthly report, has worked for us for 17 years, the past 5 years as our health director in public health, nursing. Excellent background, and I'm just so excited. I know that members of the board that were part of the interview process are also excited. I just love to be able to recognize internal leadership and the ability of going to the next stage after Doug finally does retire. So I would ask for your consideration of that appointment and then introduce Sarah to you and ask for a few comments.
So a motion by Supervisor Cruz to approve the county administrator's recommendation to hire Sarah Spa as the next county public health director, seconded by Supervisor Cable. Discussion on this item. All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Congratulations. Sarah is here with us. Come on up and make sure the red button's on.
Might have to move that down. I'm not as tall as Doug Mormon. And I also don't have the big shoes that he wears. So I'm appreciative of him staying on to really give me a good transition. I look to you all for advice and to hear support and your issues that we can improve upon in public health. I really appreciate all your support, and I hope to serve you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
And just to clarify for everyone, Sarah knows this, but so that you know, while Doug is still working for us, he will continue to be the director. We will designate Sarah as deputy, and then when he because of all the statutory requirements, until he's actually retired, we won't have a confusion of who actually is the director. I just wanted to clarify that, so your approval is actually effective with when Doug is done. He's given us up to 3 months to help make the transition, but there's certain statutory responsibilities, so we didn't want to have dual directors, but Sarah, in essence, would be a deputy or a director in waiting, for lack of a better term. Madam Chair, there's a question.
Supervisor Hoffman.
I would simply like to say to Administrator O'Malley that I appreciate the fact that we were able to have quality personnel within the organization to promote, as opposed to needing to look from outside the organization. Not that I think that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that I'm glad to see we have quality personnel within the organization so that we don't have to be looking outside.
That's happened 3 times in a row. I'm very pleased with that. So, okay, the next item in your agenda under my report is just a reminder of the 2015 budget summary that we agreed, rather than the entire document. This actually summarizes for you all of the decisions, the presentations, property tax impacts on individual properties, as well as the data that deals with the fees and charges. If you misplace this or you have constituents that are interested, it's online either under my webpage or department, and also under finance, which has a whole lot of other financial reports. So I don't need to go through it. We've done a lot of work with that, but our finance staff completed the document for you for future reference. The next item is just a short memo that I provided to you in your agenda packet, and I just wanted to, and it's in relation to the question of a referendum, but I also wanted to just weigh in. I was asked to do some interviews because the memo is in the packet. I wasn't really expecting that much attention. I did talk with Supervisor Ebert as well. I want to remind the board, county staff has not weighed in on either for or against the vehicle registration fee. We've simply provided information. It was not in our county administrator's budget. We've provided you information that you've had to debate whether or not it's an appropriate time to consider in relation to the road challenges that we have. But I just, using this as a teachable moment, I wanted to share with you that our history of using referenda have been primarily about advisory issues that have a statewide matter. We're a representative democracy. County government doesn't have a lot of involvement in using referenda decisions. You obviously have the choice to do that. You can always do that on any matter. But in general, in Wisconsin county government, we're governed by elected people that are elected by district. making a decision based on the authority that they have, whereas other counties and other states, other local governments like school districts have a very statutory responsibility for certain matters that go to referenda. So the question that I ask you to consider is that historically we have not used referenda for decisions, and if you were to do that, maybe that's a larger discussion about when do you think and what's the trigger that actually drives having a referenda decision. Should it be a capital item? Should it be a dollar amount? A referenda on a $20 fee or a $10 fee, does that rise to that level? And how is that different from, say, continuation of the sales tax, or whether or not to build a replacement to the law enforcement center? So I'm just asking you to consider that historically we have not used referenda on relatively small matters, and we certainly haven't done it on really large matters. You've been elected by the people to make decisions, and if you're not convinced that we should have a vehicle registration fee, that's your purview and that's your decision. And that's why I wanted to raise that issue, because we don't have a historical background of using referenda for decisions that you make. The other thing, because of that I needed to raise is the appropriate role of county staff. See, in school districts, when they have referenda decisions, they have a very set prescribed process to go through. They're certainly able to provide public information. They have a budget for it. There's ways that advocacy committees register both for and against referenda. They're used to that. County government staff are not used to being involved in referenda questions, and as split as this board seems to be on this issue, I'd be very reluctant for either myself or the highway commissioner to be much involved in providing all that much public information if there were to be a referenda question. If there was more unanimity in a school referendum, for example, most of the time the school board is unanimous, or maybe one or two. It's very clear that the governing body is in favor of asking the public on that issue. I don't think we have that kind of consensus on the board with this issue, and that's an example. So I would be very reluctant to be involved, because how would I be able to just be perceived as presenting information, or the highway commissioner just presenting information that would not seem to advocate in favor of the fee or against it? And depending on where you sit on the board, our role would be scrutinized very much, and I would not be comfortable with doing that. We don't have that experience. We believe we serve an elected body that has the authority to make those decisions, and that's what we provide that information. Again, the vehicle registration fee was not in our budget. We've provided that information for you to debate, and if you feel that the time is not right to go ahead with that, I don't think the referendum is the best means to serve that debate. If you're not convinced that it makes sense, that you have the authority to make that decision. So I just wanted to provide you that information, and also it would be much different than you've used referenda in any case, at least since 2003. Attached to the memo was a list of the referenda questions that you've actually approved. In every case except one, they were all dealing with statewide issues that you wanted the public to weigh in on and give input to the state on issues. The only one that was different was the county exec referendum, which is quite often when you use referenda in city, county, or village government, is about form of government. So there are times where villages and cities do the same type of thing. It's very statutorily prescribed how you deal with the county exec referendum and when that happens. So there are statutory guidelines. So I didn't mean to take that much time with this. I thought I'd just refer to the memo, but because I've gotten so many questions about this, I wanted you to understand why we didn't weigh on whether or not to have a vehicle fee. That's providing you information to have that debate, but I think this is unique that a referendum on just one item is different from your past precedent and much different from how we relate to an elected body that makes decisions.
Supervisor Logue.
Just to clarify there, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, so you're saying that you wouldn't provide factual information, or Mr. Chamberlain won't provide factual information to an inquiry from a supervisor or for the public when it comes to this?
No, I'm saying that if you're going to just for argument's sake have a referenda, the public should have information, just like when you do a school bond referendum on whether or not to have that. We don't have a budget for that. And I can't perceive a means that, as contentious as this issue is, that number one, we'd have to appropriate money to have that budget. What kind of postcards or what kind of public information would we provide, and how would we be perceived as county staff, and how we present that information in a balanced way. And quite frankly, if you're not going to have a budget or public information on it, how is the public going to weigh in on whether or not to have a fee, whether or not, what do they get out of it? If the question is only yes or no, we want the fee, but we don't know what we're getting out of it, well, I think you're wasting time to ask people a question that doesn't at least show them what they would get. But as county staff, I don't feel very comfortable with weighing in on a marketing or public relations type of thing that's not going to be perceived positively by people that are against doing the fee. And if I'm not strong enough presenting the information, and it's a form of government that we're not used to practicing it. We're used to providing you information, you vote something up or down, and we go ahead and do that. So that's certainly I provide information, certainly I'd answer questions. But I don't think that's sufficient given the way school districts do their referendums. There's a very prescribed process. It's a very, it's just a form of government that we don't do, very frankly, in this state. There are states where initiative referendum for counties actually exist in state law. I was doing some research, for example, in Illinois. Citizens can petition, it gets on a ballot. I mean, there's a much different process, but that's not been my experience.
But I guess what I was just trying to understand is obviously if a say a citizen group was taking up that marketing function and they had inquiries, you would be answering. Okay.
Yep.
And then just another quick question about Ms. Spa's position and the overlap there with Mr. Moorman. So is her current position being replaced, and are we so we're essentially adding the director in waiting, or however it is? How are we budgeting for that? Is that
well, I could give you the exact details, but Sarah's promotion will be at a lower rate of pay than Mr. Moorman's. He'll be here for 3 months. It'll be completely within that. We won't have her vacancy filled within the 3 months, but it's all well within the existing budget.
Thank you very much.
Anything else on Mr. O'Malley's items? If not, I don't think I don't know that we had any correspondence or cards on the bulletin board, but if there was anything, it's back on the board. No meetings during recess. Supervisor Hampson, if you would take the chair for appointments, please.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 7 appointments, all to the Local Emergency Planning Committee, and I move their approval.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Supervisor Ridgman. Any discussion on those appointments? Okay, excuse me, sorry. Supervisor Hoffman.
Just a point of clarification. To reappoint Supervisor Burke as an elected official with a term that expires on the 3rd Tuesday in January of 2017. We have an election cycle that happens in April of 2016. What happens if Supervisor Burke doesn't run for the county board or isn't reelected to the county board?
Then that position would be considered a vacancy, and it would have to we'd have to fill that vacancy at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. That has happened before, and it's just another appointment at that time. Anything else? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Anything else for you, Supervisor Johnson?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Hampson. On to the consent agenda. In the absence of Supervisor Plesha, who historically makes the motion on the consent agenda, Supervisor Jerome moves approval of the consent agenda, seconded by Supervisor Scheller. Discussion on the consent agenda. All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. On to Judiciary and Law Committee, Supervisor Burke.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I have item 111, the honorable members of La Crosse County Board of Supervisors regarding adopting the La Crosse County Multi-Hazards Mitigation Plan 2015 to 2019. Now therefore be it resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby adopts the La Crosse County Multi-Hazards Mitigation Plan 2015-2019 as an official plan, and be it further resolved that the La Crosse County Emergency Management Department will submit on behalf of the participating municipalities the adopted multi-hazards mitigation plan to Wisconsin Emergency Management and Federal Emergency Management Agency officials for their review and approval. Fiscal note, no cost to La Crosse County. I move its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Burke to approve the resolution, seconded by Supervisor Barlow. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Burke, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You do have a copy of the La Crosse County, Wisconsin Multi-Hazards Mitigation Plan. It's a lengthy document, and it is it is just really looking at the plan and updating it for La Crosse County. It's a plan that is, if you, it doesn't say it in the resolution, but it's a plan that's prepared by the Mississippi River Regional Planning Commission, and it's a cooperative cost-sharing agreement with the La Crosse County Board of Supervisors, the Mississippi River Regional Planning Commission, the Wisconsin Emergency Management, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It allows municipalities within La Crosse County to indicate projects that they may have, and that it qualifies them to receive grants then from Wisconsin and federal grants.
Other discussion on the resolution. Supervisor Veenstra, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to commend whoever was responsible for creating this behemoth, because it looks like a lot of work and stuff that people don't think about until something actually happens. It's a problem. So thank you.
Other discussion on the resolution. Anybody for first time? Supervisor Giese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak in favor of approval of the resolution, but I have several observations to make. Hopefully they're constructive in nature. One, there is, best I can tell, no reference to emergency communication. And if that is in fact the case, I think that is a significant need to be addressed. A number of the citations as to references are without dates, so there's no way of going back and telling whether this data is from a most recent report or when it was done. Having said that, those are brought forward in the spirit of hopefully being constructive, and I do encourage adoption of the report.
Thank you, Supervisor Giese. Other discussion? Anybody for a first time before I go back to Supervisor Burke? All right, back to you, Supervisor Burke.
I wanted to recognize Keith Butler's work with emergency management as part of the preparation. Thanks.
So will you communicate with Keith then the suggestions or the constructive observations made by Supervisor Giese? Any other discussion, constructive or otherwise? All those in favor of the resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Anything else from Judiciary and Law? Thank you very much. On to Planning, Resources, and Development, Supervisor Holtz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have item 1-12, a conditional use permit number 940 filed by Dale Hexum, Director of Public Works for the City of La Crosse, on behalf of the City of La Crosse, for a 180-foot self-supported public safety radio system support tower with a 12-by-12 equipment building and LP tank on land zoned recreational natural resources in the town of Madera. The PR&D committee voted unanimously to approve. I moved concurrence with the committee.
Supervisor Holtz moves the committee report, seconded by Supervisor Hoffman. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Ferries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any easements that were required for this project?
Mr. Handy, if you would.
Oh, there we go. No, the access to the site is to the City of La Crosse, and they retain ownership of the entire site. There is an easement that's given to the Mississippi Valley Conservancy for conservation over the top of that ownership.
Other discussion on this item? Supervisor Giese.
At committee, I did vote in favor of this. However, I had made an observation there that I'd like to share with the entire board. It's a little bit problematic for me why we're paying for radio transmission in this day and age when we have Wi-Fi and commercial services available. And I really think this is the design life for this facility in terms of the physical plant itself greatly exceeds its useful life, and we should be looking for alternatives.
Other discussion on this item? All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Anything else from Planning, Resources, and Development?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. On to Public Works and Infrastructure. It's the night of the vice chair tonight. Supervisor Geary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first resolution I have is to honorable members of the La Crosse County Board of Supervisors request approval of jurisdictional transfer of portion of Old County Trunk Highway OA to Town of Barry. Now therefore be it resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby approves that the portion of Old CTH OA attached hereto as Exhibit A be deleted from the county highway system and transferred to the Town of Barry highway system. And be it further resolved that the La Crosse County Board Chair and County Clerk are hereby authorized to execute any documents to effectuate this resolution after approval by Corporation Council. Fiscal note, no direct cost to La Crosse County. The county will no longer have maintenance responsibilities for this portion of Old CTH OA. I move for its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Geary to approve, seconded by Supervisor Holtz. Discussion on this item. All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Back to you, Mr. Geary.
To honorable members of La Crosse County Board of Supervisors, request approval of jurisdictional transfer of portion of Old County Trunk Highway OA to Town of Greenfield. Now therefore be it resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby approves that the portion of Old CTH OA attached hereto as Exhibit A be deleted from La Crosse County Highway System and transferred to the Town of Greenfield Highway System. Be it further resolved that the La Crosse County Board Chair and County Clerk are hereby authorized to execute any documents to effectuate this resolution after approval by Corporation Council. Fiscal note, no direct cost to La Crosse County. The county will no longer have maintenance responsibilities for the portions of Old CTH OA transferred. I move for its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Geary to approve, seconded by Supervisor Kyle. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Doyle.
Just out of curiosity, when we make these changes, does the name ever change or does it always stay at the same name?
Mr. Chamberlain, if you would respond to the question from the rhetorical question department.
The names do change. In this case, we asked for input from the town of Greenfield on what they would like the name some time ago to change to. They in turn asked their constituency. The response back was Casa del Sol. They asked us for Casa del Sol and is actually named Casa del Sol at this point.
Oh, so it wasn't a rhetorical question after all. My apologies, Supervisor Doyle. Anything else? Is it called that every day, even if the sun isn't out?
Actually, yes, it's a memorial thing for one of the residents.
Nice. Other discussion on this item, Supervisor Barlow.
So follow up on that question, will it be the town of Greenfield's responsibility to contact all the parties that need to be contacted in terms of the name change, the address changes for the residents along this stretch of road?
This is all long done.
Okay, this has all been done. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other discussion on this item? All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That is approved. Back to you, Mr. Geary.
To honorable members of La Crosse County Board of Supervisors, request to change the annual vehicle registration fee statute. Whereas Wisconsin Statute 341.35 authorizes a municipality or county to impose an annual vehicle registration fee on all motor vehicles or motor trucks registered at a gross weight of not more than 8,000 pounds with certain statutory exemptions. Whereas the state authorizes that any fees collected shall be utilized only for transportation-related purposes. Whereas vehicles with a gross weight of over 8,000 pounds do significantly more damage to the highways in the state of Wisconsin in comparison to vehicles with a gross weight of under 8,000 pounds. Whereas the damage to roads from a fully loaded quad-axle dump truck is approximately equivalent to the damage from 9,600 automobiles. Now therefore it be resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby supports an amendment to Wisconsin Statutes 341.35 to include within the definition of motor vehicles an automobile or motor truck with a gross weight of 8,000 pounds or greater, so that such vehicles are not exempt from the application of the registration fee. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be sent to Governor Walker, Senator Schilling, Representatives Doyle and Billings, Wisconsin Department of Transportation Secretary Mark Gottlieb, and the Wisconsin Counties Association. Fiscal note, no cost to the County of La Crosse. I move for its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Geary, seconded by Supervisor Veenstra. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Hampson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if there was anyone in the room who was actually in the state legislature. Oh, there is. Can you give us some clue? This has been what I've received the most feedback about, is that it's not fair that the vehicles that are doing the most damage are exempt from the fee. Can you give us a little background on why state statute is that way, and what would happen if the legislature tried to change that?
Well, it's been that way for quite some time, but I suspect that what it has, the argument that I suspect it was made when it was enacted that way is that the larger vehicles pay a lot of other sorts of fees and gas tax and so forth. I'm speculating on that. In terms of this issue coming up for future consideration in the legislature, that would be the same thing that I suspect we would hear is the commercial carriers, businesses and so forth would, to use a bad pun, weigh in on this issue, and I suspect to be opposed to it. I mean, I think that you raise a very legitimate concern. I know that's the thing that I've heard from a lot of people on too. I'm not optimistic that that would change at the state legislative level.
Thank you, Supervisor Doyle, for answering Supervisor Hampson's question. Other discussion on this resolution? Supervisor Holtz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support this resolution, although I agree with Supervisor Doyle that it's not going to receive that much of a reception in Madison, in my opinion. Well, the only problem, some of the problems I have with the current situation is that the way the state statute is written, we don't have any much say about it. We can't say it can affect motorcycles. We can't say that it affects the first car in a family and not the second, or there's no provision for exclusions of any kind. So the statute needs some work. I know the state legislature is going to be looking at changing some laws because they're out of money too. So I know they're going to be addressing it for the state. I'm hoping that they will address it for counties too. My personal opinion is everybody should share with that cost, not just necessarily the residents of a given county. I would hope the state legislature would take into effect that if they created another 0.5% sales tax to use for county purposes for roads only, that would make a lot more sense. And this is the reason why I say it makes more sense. First off, that would mean everybody that goes through La Crosse County, that stops and shops at our malls, buys food at our restaurants, helps contribute to the roads that they're driving on. Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, it doesn't matter. They would help contribute. In La Crosse County, 1/10 of 1% of the sales tax would generate over $2 million a year, which is more than the $20 can generate. And I know that retail establishments don't necessarily like to see sales tax increased, but in our case, in La Crosse, going from 5.5% to 5.6% isn't going to stop anybody from shopping out at the mall or in La Crosse County. And the fact that the big trucks don't pay to the wheel tax, most of the big trucks are bringing merchandise to the merchants in our area to stock their shelves. So it only makes sense that they contribute something towards the use of the roads. And I think a sales tax adjustment is a much more equitable way to do it, because it affects people that are buying things and not a regressive tax like a wheel tax or a property tax. Thank you.
On the resolution, other discussion. Supervisor Logue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Supervisor Hampson had some good questions there, and I think Supervisor Doyle did a good job of answering it sort of off the cuff. But it seems like we would want to have, if we're really debating this and making a recommendation, that we would want to know a little bit more about the answers to Supervisor Hampson's questions. And it seems a little short-sighted on our part to make a recommendation when I don't see us really having debated those issues. And I don't know that we debate them in committee, I guess, but I suspect not. This seems like kind of a reaction to feedback from people, which is good, but I don't understand how we can make an informed decision when there are some very good questions there that I feel like we don't really have answers to. Thank you.
Supervisor Veenstra.
I'm the Quixotic supervisor who proposed this resolution. And I think it's been before the board for at least a couple months in some fashion or the other. I've received more inquiries about the wheel tax than any other issue, and every single person who has talked to me or emailed me about it has said it's unfair because it does not apply to vehicles that weigh 8,000 pounds or more who cause the most damage to our roads. And I think it's a fair thing to tell our state legislature, if you're going to do something, whether it's inequitable, whether it's smart, whatever, at least make it fair in some fashion with the vehicles that cause the damage. And that's why I proposed it. And whether the vehicle tax in a general matter is a smart thing to do or the best way to finance roads, I'm not even sure about that myself. But if we're going to have one, and the state has said we can, it should apply evenly and fairly. That's the only reason really I enacted. I'm proposing this and supporting it. Thank you.
Other discussion on the resolution. Supervisor Paff.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say that I was, I believe, the only one that voted against this, because my reasoning was that we do not understand it, like Mr. Logue said, that these trucks and these larger vehicles pay, well, I don't want to be quoted on the amount of dollars that they pay, but it's at least tenfold of what vehicle registration is for large trucks. And another thing we can't do when you start talking about in the state of Wisconsin, this would be for the legislature to decide on how to do that. But to keep interstate commerce working, you don't want any trucking firms or any of them, even in our own county, to either move out of state, or if you try to do something within county on something like large trucks or dump trucks, they move to another county or state for their office for licensing, you would be defeating the purpose of what you're trying to do. So I voted against this in committee, and I will vote against it now. I know I will lose, but that's all right. I'm used to it. I'm a farmer. Anyway, that's the way it is.
Supervisor Doyle.
Well, here's how I interpret what we're doing here this evening. Is what we're saying is, we've got this issue before us where we have been talking about the tax here and the fees here in La Crosse County, and we're concerned about, is this equitable? And so we're saying is, hey, legislature, is this something you've thought about? Is this a concern that is legitimate? And when my office, and I assume my colleague's office, get this, it will raise our awareness that there is a concern at this level, and probably even respond to the body saying, here's what we've been able to determine is what's going on with this particular issue. So I don't see, we're not making a final decision. We're not saying La Crosse County Board is going to have this tax or not have this tax based on 8,000 pounds. I mean, that's a state decision. But what we're saying is, hey, we have this concern. Can you answer us? Tell us why it is this way. I don't see a problem with at least raising an issue and asking the questions.
Supervisor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's often interesting I investigated this question related to the registration fee to see what would it be like to go to live in Minnesota or live in Iowa. And it's interesting, even beyond just the fact of changing, the amount of pounds that the vehicle would have to be in order to enact this particular fee. I think within the states of Iowa and Minnesota, they make account for the age of the vehicle and the weight of your vehicle in the formulas in calculating your annual registration fee, where larger and newer vehicles often pay much more exorbitant fees than even the $75 we pay in the state of Wisconsin. And I think, it's hard to articulate every single change we think might be useful to share with the people in Madison. But it's interesting how those two states, accorded a more intricate formula to compute some kind of registration fee, including, I think, in the state of Minnesota, the assessed value or base value of the vehicle. So there are more intricate ways of doing these fees that somewhat address some of the issues that have been raised before us regarding vehicle fees. And anyway, I think it's useful for us as a body to move something like this forward, even just to communicate the importance of the issue at the state level when they're going to hear from lots of voices on this particular issue. Thank you.
Other discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The noes are Logue, Paff, Hoffman. That resolution is approved. Anything else from you, Supervisor Geary? That's it. Thank you. On to Executive Committee in keeping with the Vice Chair theme. Supervisor Veenstra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have before the Board Resolution 1-16 regarding approval of amendment of offer to purchase with Stizzo Development, LLC, for purchase of County Administrative Center. Whereas by Resolution 71-1/14, La Crosse County Board accepted the offer to purchase from Stizzo Development, LLC, to purchase La Crosse County Admin Center for a purchase price of $250,000, which also included an agreement to lease property back to La Crosse County at closing, with the lease commencing at closing and ending August 31st, 2016, and the county and Stizzo entered into the offer to purchase on or about January 21st, 2014. And now, therefore, it be resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby approves the amendment to the offer to purchase between La Crosse County and Stizzo in accordance with the terms of this resolution, and be it further resolved that the La Crosse County Board Chair is further authorized to execute any documents necessary to effectuate this resolution after approval by Corporation Council. Fiscal note: La Crosse County will be responsible for an additional $1,667 per month for any additional lease term. I move its approval.
Supervisor Veenstra moves approval, seconded by Supervisor Jerome. Just a reminder to the board, this is the blue papered version of this that was at your place this evening coming out of the 5 o'clock executive committee meeting. Just that's true of 3 items that Supervisor Veenstra is bringing out from executive committee. So discussion on this resolution. Would you just inform the committee, the board what the vote was in committee, please, since we don't have minutes from that yet?
I think the executive committee vote was unanimous.
Yeah, there were 5 members present. All 5 voted in favor of it.
And if I could speak to the amendment as well, it's essentially an opportunity for us to make the terms, in case this whole group of dominoes didn't work the way we all intended to, what it would do would allow us ultimately to stay in the Associated Bank move and allow us to stay here and allow Associated Bank to stay in the Associated Bank building until such time as we were able to repurchase or do whatever we needed to do if this whole group of sales went south in the middle of it. It's highly unlikely given the intent of all the parties, but the attorneys involved wanted to make sure that none of the parties were homeless. What it would do is extend our time in here under the provisions of the earlier resolution, and then if by some chance we weren't able to vacate when we intended to, it would allow us to stay for a further period, but at market-based rent based on appraisal of this property versus the below market rate rent that we'll be paying in the extension period. We will also, as you will note in the next resolution related to Associated Bank, be recovering market-based rent from them. So it's sort of in the words I used at the executive committee, were tit-for-tat type of proposals. So thank you.
Other discussion on this resolution? Supervisor Hampson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. We keep hearing about market rate rent. Does anyone have any idea what that would be so we could compare it to the 1,667?
Mr. Fukuda, or do you have the answer, Mr. O'Malley?
It would have to be based on the use of Midwest appraisal, which would have to be based on comparable rents. We don't have a dollar amount because it would be at that time, but it has to be comparable to a like building that's in this kind of shape that is compared to other properties. So, for example, it would be more comparable to the King on Fifth office building than perhaps a brand new building that's getting $15 a square foot. Or so it would be. It has to be comparable based on an independent appraisal of Midwest appraisal at that time.
So, does anyone have any idea what that kind of rate would be right now?
I don't think we.
That wasn't the subject of it. We don't. But knowing that the example of the building I use that's in less repair, similar to this, I think that's under $10 a square foot is the building I just referred to, while other buildings are, 13, 14, 15 that are new, brand new shape, that type of thing. But that would be determined by an independent appraiser.
And those numbers that Mr. O'Malley just cited are current rates.
Yeah.
So this would be at the time if this would have to kick in. Other discussion on the resolution? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Supervisor Ebert, you got to raise your hand higher, sir. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to tie this all together, this would still be that we're going to close on all three things at one time. So it's not we're going to close on two, and so it's still all contingent, because that's otherwise it really becomes a disaster. I just wanted to make sure that was. It's more than just these two. It's also the third.
It's
third
also the
ball.
It's also the Weber proposal that you just adopted at the last meeting. Everything has to happen at the same time because no party's going to start investing, remodeling or design or anything in a building they don't own. That's why all three have to work together.
Yeah, I thank you, because that with just these two coming up, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you, sir.
Anything else on the resolution? All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The noes are Hoffman, Ferries, Logue. The resolution is approved. Back to you, Mr. Veenstra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have resolution, I'm sorry, I forgot the number. What is it? 17. To the Honorable Members of La Crosse County Board of Supervisors regarding the approval of amendment to purchase agreement with Associated Bank. Whereas by Resolution 17-6/14, the La Crosse County Board approved a purchase agreement whereby La Crosse County would purchase 3 Associated Bank properties and also approve a short-term lease of portions of the property to Associated Bank. And now therefore be it resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby approves the amendment to the real estate purchase agreement between La Crosse County and Associated Bank dated November 7th, 2014 in accordance with the terms outlined in this resolution. And be it further resolved that the County Board Chair is hereby authorized to execute any documents necessary to effectuate this resolution after approval by Corporation Council. fiscal note associated to pay rent based on market rentals if lease extends beyond January 1st, 2017, and county to pay appraisal expense. I move its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Veenstra, seconded by Supervisor Cruz. Discussion on this item. All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The noes are Hoffman, Logue, and Ferries. Back to you, Mr. Veenstra.
I have item 1-18, a resolution regarding establishing the Administrative Center and Downtown Campus Construction Committee. Whereas the Administrative Center has significant deferred maintenance needs for asbestos abatement, major repairs to plumbing, electrical, and network systems, and roof replacement. And whereas by Resolution 35-8/13, the County Board selected River Architects conduct a space needs and option study for remodel or replacement of the Admin Center, and the lowest cost option identified includes remodeling of the current Associated Bank property and constructing an addition to the Health and Human Services building. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Board of Supervisors hereby approves the formation of the Administrative Center and Downtown Campus Construction Committee, with with the chair and a total membership of up to 9 board members to be appointed by the County Board Chair. Be it further resolved that the ACDCCC shall oversee the next phases of design, remodeling, and construction of the addition to the HHS building and the Associated Bank building for recommendation directly to the County Board. Fiscal note, there is no immediate cost to La Crosse County to form this committee. The 2014 budget included funding for architectural and engineering services to begin design of the preferred options, and the 2015 budget includes up to $22 million to construct the preferred option. I move its approval.
Moved by Supervisor Veenstra, seconded by Supervisor Holtz. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I tried to make an amendment to this in the Executive Board, and I don't know, my powers of communication are trying to explain why I had a problem with it and voted no on it. And it has to do with the now therefore be it resolved, and it has to do with it saying a total membership of up to 9 board members. I think that if I ask any county board supervisor if it would be okay if this committee had 3 or 4 members, that would not be okay. Yet that's what you're saying if you vote yes on this, because it says, and a total membership of up to 9 board members. So my motion was to delete up to, and I will offer that motion again, a motion to amend the now therefore be it resolved clause to delete up to.
Supervisor Burke has made a motion to amend the resolution to delete the words up to in the now therefore be it resolved clause. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hoffman. Discussion on the amendment. Supervisor Burke, you still have the floor.
Certainly. I think that it will be possible for us to get at least 9 county board supervisors who are interested in our 8. The chair is automatically, according to this, on the committee, and that are interested in serving on the committee. And I think it's important that anyone who really wishes to serve on a committee that is of this importance has that opportunity to do so. And I just do not like the wording, because when it says up to, it means it could be 5, it could be 6. Then if it's 5, your quorum is 3. If it is 9, your quorum is at least 5 county board supervisors. So that was my reasoning.
Other discussion on the Burke amendment. Supervisor Barlow.
So just a question in terms of the composition of the Downtown Administrative Study Committee. I'm forgetting what the number of supervisors was on that group. And then the other question would be, when we had if there probably was a similar construction committee for the law enforcement center addition, and what was the number of supervisors on that group? Thank you.
So there were 7 on the Admin Center and Downtown Campus Study Committee. The LEC committee's membership fluctuated over time. When we passed the resolution initially, I believe that there were 7 members, and then changes after that. I'm certain that Supervisor Burke has a clarification on this. But the Admin Center Downtown Campus Study Committee was 7.
And then in terms of moving towards the future, we're crossing our fingers that January 22nd we get positive bids on the Lakeview Healthcare Center process. So
Correct.
I'm wondering which body, or is that the long-term care
Veterans
committee?
Aging and Long-Term Care has oversight of the Lakeview construction process.
Okay, so those members will be fully vested in oversight of that project. Okay, thank you.
Other discussion on the Burke amendment. Supervisor Veenstra.
I just think this is a semantic amendment without a problem. I think it's highly unlikely that the committee will include members who are not interested in attending. Granted, there have been times, but also I think there is the backup that whoever is the chair of the committee can request another person to attend to substitute for an individual if there is low attendance. I think that's the standard customary practice, if at all possible. If people provide notice that they can attend, it makes it a lot easier. And also, I just think it's highly unlikely that there will ultimately be a problem. So I probably won't be voting in favor of the amendment. I think people in general have done a good job of attending the committees that they are supposed to and doing their job. Finally, anything this committee does will have to go through this body and be reviewed and questioned and nitpicked if people do their job. So we have a lot of protections built into it, and I would grant that the committee will be doing a lot of probably grunt work and analysis and things like that, but certainly anyone can attend. The minutes will be posted. I imagine they might even be posted on the front page of the county board website like all the other construction-related stuff has been. Thank you.
Supervisor Hampson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that when we had our executive committee meeting tonight at 5, one of the newer supervisors raised his hand and said, "Can I comment?" So I want to at least clarify that for newish board members, that you're invited to attend any of these meetings, and you will be called on if your hand is raised. So you can still have an impact on that committee even though you're not appointed to it. That's it. Thanks.
Anybody else wishing to be heard for the first time on the Burke amendment? Supervisor Geary.
I like the amendment. I don't like the idea of if you have to appoint someone to sit in at a meeting that missed all the meetings for 2 or 3 months previously. This is the kind of a committee that's going to has a short duration. You'll have no background information on it, and if somebody hasn't been there for the last 6 meetings, they're trying to get caught up on what you're voting on or what you're trying to do. Can't we just do a quick show of hands and see if we got 9 people that want to be on it? I know there's a few absent, to make sure we're going to get to the 9 or the 7 or whatever it's going to end up on.
Well, we're debating an amendment right now, so let's take.
Yeah, that's my point. If 9 people are raising their hands that they want to get on it, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
If there were more members wishing to serve on the Admin Center Downtown Campus Study Committee than the 7 spots that were called for in the resolution that formed that committee. I anticipate that there will be interest in this committee as well, likely that exceeds 9. Other discussion on the Burke amendment from a first-time speaker before I go back to Supervisor Burke for a second time. If not, Supervisor Burke, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I anticipated that there might be a question about the law enforcement, the resolution establishing that resolution said approved the formation of the Law Enforcement Center Addition Building Construction Committee to meet biweekly, and that did not that the membership of the committee was appointed by the county board chair, the former county board chair, and county Supervisor Doyle when he was county board. The difference being that on that committee, the chair indicated that anyone who wished to participate in that committee would be allowed, any supervisor to wish to be on that committee. On I also went over the minutes, and when the board was formed, initially there were 10 members, and then an additional member of a supervisor who was from the university area, who came on the committee, and then he came onto the committee as well because he wished to. And then through unforeseen circumstances, he was gone from the county board. And at that time, there were 10 members who were very consistent in attending until February of 2009. Now, this resolution was 2007. So 2009, there were 2 members who left the board. And then there were 8 very consistent members, and we did not have a quorum difficulty. Some of those members currently serving on the board.
Any other discussion on the Burke amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, which is to eliminate the words up to in the now therefore be it resolved clause, please signify by saying aye. The ayes are, if you'd raise your hand, please. The ayes are Richmond, Kyle, Hoffman, Ferries, Hesse, Geary, Burke, and Ebert. The clerk is requesting we do a vote on the computer. So if you are in favor of the Burke amendment to eliminate the words up to in the now therefore be it resolved clause, vote no if you are opposed. The supervisor who was born and raised in the state of Illinois is trying to vote as many times as possible on this one. Just saying. The Burke amendment fails on a vote of 8 in favor, 16 opposed. Back to the resolution. Discussion on the resolution. Any other discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, Supervisor Barlow.
Just a quick one based on that attempted amendment. There seemed to be some concern about members not showing up who might be appointed to this committee not showing up. Would it be in the purview of the committee once it is formed to establish rules that if someone doesn't attend 2 meetings in a row or 3 meetings in a row, that they would be asked to excuse themselves, or would that be out of order?
Yeah, I mean, I will say from my perspective, that was part of the intent of the form, is to make it clear what the expectations are, the duration of the work of this committee, and that if you are interested in serving and commit to that you understand what you're committing to. Dave, perhaps you can chime in on the parliamentary portion of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could set rules, but it should have some expectation where people know if you miss so many, then you could be off and you have to appoint somebody else. But so I think the committee could do that.
Supervisor Hesse.
Well, attending the meetings, it's going to depend on what time of day it's going to be for people working.
And so this committee, as is the case with standing committees, one of the first things is to establish a regular meeting time. So that will definitely be important. Supervisor Cable.
Is there any sense about how frequently the meetings will be scheduled?
I think there's an expectation that it will be front-loaded. Maybe is Brian still here? He's trying to leave. Brian, the question was about the frequency of meetings for the construction committee. If you could come up to the microphone, please. I think it's going to be busy in the next several months as it ramps up. I think that there will be some lulls, but the work won't be done until move-in happens. So the question, Brian, is what's the expected regularity of meetings for the construction committee? I don't know if your Gantt chart shows that
I guess,
or not.
Not really, but I guess as you indicated, it's I haven't really thought about this too much, if you can't tell, but I think, as we get into the brunt of the design work, and I mean, it'll probably be fairly intense at certain periods. As you all know, there is timeline and there is, dates that need to be hit. And if we miss certain dates, it's going to push the whole timeline off. So there will be times during design that things are probably pretty intense, where we're meeting. I wouldn't anticipate any more than every couple of weeks, a couple times a month. But then there will be times, that you may not meet for a couple of months, just because there aren't decisions to be made. Things are just kind of, happening outside and work's being done. And then it'll probably, get a little more frequent again once construction starts and all of that. But I don't know if that answers the question real well, but.
Was that it for you, Supervisor Cable? Other discussion on the resolution? Supervisor Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it was our experience with the Construction Committee for Law Enforcement that first year and a half was almost twice monthly, so it requires quite a commitment.
Any other discussion on the resolution? All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. One no. Supervisor Burke. Back to you, Supervisor. That is approved. Back to you, Supervisor Veenstra.
I have item 1-19, a resolution regarding advisory referendum regarding the adoption of a county annual vehicle.
Supervisor Veenstra, before you read that, I think, were you wanting to ask for unanimous consent to take up item 1-20 first?
Sorry about that.
Just given what happened in executive committee.
Yes, I would request unanimous consent to take up item number 1-20, which is consideration of the annual vehicle registration fee. And
the ordinance?
Yeah, the ordinance.
So is there any objection to taking up item 1-20 prior to 1-19? Seeing none, go ahead, Supervisor Veenstra, with item 1-20.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have before the board item 1-20, an ordinance to create section 4.12 entitled Annual Vehicle Registration Fee of the General Code of La Crosse County, Wisconsin. Do I have to actually read? I forget what the rule is.
This is first consideration. So
okay. First consideration of that ordinance.
So Supervisor Veenstra moves first consideration of ordinance 137 to create section 4.12 entitled Annual Vehicle Registration Fee of the General Code of La Crosse. So Supervisor Veenstra moves this as its first reading. It doesn't require a second for its reading. Normally, when an ordinance is first reading, second reading this following month, this is an item that we can now discuss. Folks can offer amendments, can make motions regarding the ordinance as next month as well. Supervisor Veenstra, you still have the floor.
I'd ask to retain the floor, and I'd actually move at this time to postpone indefinitely the consideration of this ordinance. I don't know if now is the time to articulate my reasons, but that would be the motion.
Well, let's get a second to that. So Supervisor Veenstra is moving to postpone indefinitely the consideration of this ordinance, seconded by Supervisor Holtz. You still have the floor, Supervisor Veenstra. So what we're debating now is the motion to postpone indefinitely.
Thank you. I brought this up at the executive committee after we had discussed at length the item 1-19, which was the idea that we would have a referendum on the imposition of the vehicle registration fee. The reasons that I am moving to postpone this indefinitely are the following. One, this was not originally included in our budget. If you may recall, in the budget process, we have a number of items that are considered fees that are added, raised, modified, deleted, combined, etc. We kind of voted on them in one fell swoop, and they were analyzed through a committee process, the changes that were made through the departments, and then we made the decisions as part of a larger budget decision. We got this, actually it was not part of the budget, and it was brought up as an idea in the executive committee, I believe by Supervisor Giese. Given the transportation funding problems that have been articulated ad nauseum by Mr. Chamberlain, I think it was fair to say that the executive committee saw it as a possible way to handle some of the challenges that we're facing. However, I'm not sure at this time that this is a good time to be imposing this fee, and I'm not sure if we know what the right amount of the fee would be if we were going to impose it. We just passed a resolution asking the state to impose it on larger vehicles. The main reason I'm not sure about this fee is because the State Department of Transportation has proposed big changes to its funding mechanism with the in their proposed budget to the governor, and we don't know what the state's going to do. It's likely that we'll find that out in late spring, I believe. Maybe Supervisor Doyle can inform us on that. But we don't know what effect the state budget will have on us, and it might make sense to postpone this indefinitely so that we know the effect of the changes to the transportation funding mechanism at the state level before we make decisions about what funding process we want to add or do nothing for at the local level. As Supervisor Paff indicated, this is a huge issue in the state of Wisconsin. You know, I think our timing is just a challenge right now, and it makes sense for us to wait to see what the state's going to do and then put this perhaps even in our budget process for the next budget so that we are doing, I think, a really thorough job of analyzing whether this is a good idea or not. And we've heard a lot from our constituents, and I think most of them have said they don't want the wheel tax, at least in my experience. It's certainly understanding. Nobody wants more taxes. We also have a responsibility to provide good roads for our constituents. I think the way I put it to one of the constituents was, would you rather pay for some shocks, or would you rather pay $20? And, I don't think it's not really a joke. I think if you drive down some of our roads, we have some real troubles. And we want to do what's fair, but we want to do it with knowledge of what's coming down the pike and a real thorough analysis, and I think this is the way to do it. So that's why I'm moving that we postpone this indefinitely and give the chair and the administrator time to provide us with the information we need to make a sound decision. Thank you.
So on the motion to postpone indefinitely, Supervisor Ferries.
I guess my question would be postpone indefinitely versus table. Is there a legal, explain the difference, what that would be?
Usually if you move the table, at least according to Robert's rules, then you have to take it off the table either the same session or the next meeting is a normal rule for that. Postpone indefinitely you don't. It's postponed indefinitely, which normally means it's killed. It doesn't even have to come back, but it can come back. We just don't know when. So it's postponed indefinitely. The other alternative is postponed to a definite time. That's normally preferred, but in this case, you aren't really sure when exactly you'd want to take it up again. So,
thank you for that question, Supervisor Ferries. Discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely, Supervisor Hampson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I was the person who moved this in executive committee. I don't regret that. And I think it's been an extremely interesting discussion, community-wide. And it's brought to light some things that people need to understand better. And one is we don't have adequate funding. And it's not just our level of government. It's every other level of government. And no one wants to pay taxes. I just paid my property taxes. I hate that. It's a horrible feeling. But it's our responsibility. And if we're going to have services, if we're going to have roads, we have to have taxes and fees. I think it's been most interesting that people have focused on the 8,000 pound limit and the seeming unfairness of that. But even that is more complicated than just saying it's not fair. Because as Supervisor Paff pointed out, the commercial vehicles pay a lot of other stuff. And are we really interested in stopping commerce? So I think this has given us a lot of food for thought, and we need to continue to consider the issues of why are we taxing, and is it appropriate for us or for the state or for someone else to take care of these things? And the other thing we need to consider, given the crunch on transportation at the state and the county level and the municipal level, at what point are we prepared to drive on gravel roads rather than paved or blacktop? So those are things we need to continue to think about, and I'm perfectly happy to postpone this indefinitely.
Other discussion on the motion to postpone? Supervisor Logue. You guys on the left side of the room have to raise your hands up higher, please. Thank you. I'm missing you tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question for Mr. Lang. So as it's postponed indefinitely, then does it require, once it's taken back up, it only requires one more reading, as we've had the first reading, or you have to do 2 readings again? Is the start over?
Doesn't have to. No, come right back to the board. If someone wants to put it back on. This board is postponed indefinitely. I think it can come back in, but question of whether it would be a first reading or a second reading. Good question. I guess my initial thought would be a first reading again. Is my thinking right now. I can think about that some more, but that's what I would think.
Okay. And as much as I was kind of looking forward to maybe getting to vote no against this tax, I think this is probably a good thing to postpone indefinitely. And I'd like to ask my colleagues to consider, in the interim, as some things that Supervisor Hampson mentioned, one of the things I'd like us to consider is our spending. This board, we voted to raise taxes with the administrative center project. We know we're projecting that'll be over 3 years. That's without any other thing that may come up. I think that our roads are important. I wish we had another $1.7 million to give to Mr. Chamberlain, and I would challenge us that maybe we do, and maybe we need to look for that $1.7 million elsewhere within our budget, within what we currently spend. We may have what people consider very good programs, but what is our priority? And I think that's an opportunity for a great discussion that this debate affords us as a policy board, is to take a look at our budget priorities and what it is that we want to fund and make a priority. So I encourage my colleagues to think about that, and hopefully in our time as this is indefinitely tabled, and maybe this opens a good conversation about what our budget priorities are. Thank you very much.
Other discussion on the motion to postpone? Supervisor Burke.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the fact that certainly the motion to postpone indefinitely is, as Corporation Counsel says, more in order than tabling. And I'm glad that we finally have learned the difference between those two. I do think that it does kill it, and it would have to be brought back again in its first form. I don't think it could just be resurrected.
Supervisor Geary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for Dave. If somebody would bring it back 6 months from now, does that go back through the committee cycle, or does it just come to the county board, or how do we have to have it noticed to be on the agenda that somebody was going to take that action, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Supervisor Geary, I'm not sure about that. I looked in Robert's rules. It really doesn't even address how it comes back, so I'll have to look into that some more just to be sure on that. Okay.
Yeah, because an item of that importance, I think it should be noticed so the public was aware it was coming in. My other comment I'd make about the roads is, you see what happened when you take hundreds of millions of dollars out of the state budget that was earmarked for transportation but didn't get spent on transportation. It hurt the state and it hurt the local municipalities, and I think there's starting to recover from that. But those hundreds of millions, maybe it was in the billions, hurt the road system. It's the state and the county and should maintain some kind of fiscal integrity and spend money where it's intended to be spent and make your priorities.
Other discussion on the motion. Supervisors Giese, then Doyle, then Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trying to play by House rules here, I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion to a time certain, and that's not permissible.
We need to take this motion up. If it fails, then I would call on you, and you could offer a replacement motion.
Yeah, you can't amend a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Okay, so then I can address the motion on the floor relative to reasons why I would prefer to see it to a time certain without making a motion.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would speak in opposition to the motion as it's currently written or currently presented and argue for turning it to a time certain, and that time certain would be our July council or county board meeting. The state budget by statute has to be approved by July 1st, I think the end of June. And also remind the committee that this discussion started as part of the budget process. I agree with all the comments that are made here. The motivation for raising the issue, at least in my mind, was $3 million. And we chose to fund our highways maintenance, not capital long-term improvement, by borrowing $3 million. This is just one of possibly many alternatives, but the only alternative I can think to have sounder fiscal policy and to limit our spending through borrowing and put it on a more sustainable basis. Thanks.
So again, just clarification, there's no opportunity to amend the motion that we're discussing now. So Supervisor Giese's comments were why he will be voting against it and his intent to replace it with a different motion. So there was somebody who wanted, anyway. So on the motion to postpone indefinitely, Supervisor Doyle.
I just wanted to address Supervisor Geary's concern about whether this could just simply come back someday. Somebody just brings it up. While Robert's Rules of Order may allow that, Wisconsin's open meeting law would not allow that. It would have to be a noticed type of thing.
Mr. Lang.
And I didn't mean
the lawyers in the room.
I didn't mean
to
imply that you couldn't do it without public notice. It's just that I wasn't sure whether it had to come back through a committee or to the board directly. But obviously, it would have to be noticed first.
Supervisor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think this is an interesting opportunity if we were to postpone to actually then think more through other options and confer perhaps with the Public Works Committee to identify, is there cost savings within our operation? Is there changes we could make that would reallocate monies within that? Again, we are working with a budget and a series of road projects that I believe are based on, the quality of the roads. And so I'm not sure how much we can find there. But I think the point is if we were to postpone this, which I'm inclined to do, that we don't waste the time just sitting on our haunches, resting on our laurels, that we do some thinking, working with staff, maybe through Public Works Committee, about what our solutions to the roads issues that we face. The roads aren't getting any younger. It's going to get colder this winter. I can feel the potholes coming in a few months, and so I do think maybe this is an opportune time for that deeper dive and more study. Thank you.
Any other laurel resters who want to speak on? So this is on the Veenstra motion to postpone indefinitely. First-time speaker, Supervisor Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, am going to support indefinite postponement, but I would like to also address a comment made earlier this evening by Mr. O'Malley. As Mr. Veenstra said, having this as part of our budget process at the end of 2015 would give us a unique perspective where possibly we could get information from the administrator that, done in a fair and equitable way, this is what programs we would have to cut if we took $1.7 million out of the budget to give to the highway department, because then I think it would give us a very good view of what the trade-offs are, which we don't have at this point in time. Thank you.
Other first-time speakers on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Supervisor Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support the postpone indefinitely motion. The discussion came up at one of the executive and public works meetings on, I think it was Mr. Chamberlain that said, along with Mr. O'Malley, that the County B, Highway 16 to County B and Vanna Reed and so on, the county would repair that and then transfer ownership to the city and gave an amount of money. I can tell you right now, the city doesn't have that money, and there hasn't been any discussion with the mayor of the city of La Crosse on this particular idea of transferring that ownership. I spoke with the mayor twice today, this afternoon again, and I asked him, has there been any discussion? And he adamantly said no. I think it's an unfair burden to the city residents that have vehicles that are going to be charged an extra $20. And I don't even think we should go any further and just postpone this indefinitely.
All right, so again, we're on the motion to postpone indefinitely. We're not on the ordinance yet, or we are not at the ordinance. So on the motion to postpone indefinitely, any other supervisors wishing to be heard? We're going to vote on the computer on this. Yes, if you are in favor of Supervisor Veenstra, sorry, I missed him.
I can't speak for anybody else on the county board, but with regard to setting it for a date certain, I think it is not something that we're going to ignore. So to the extent that may assuage concerns about it just fading into history, I think this issue is one that we should at least analyze in the future and make a decision with just more information. Thank you.
On the computer, yes if you are in favor of the motion to postpone indefinitely, no if you are opposed. Supervisors Burke and Ebert, we're waiting on your votes. The motion to postpone indefinitely has been approved on a vote of 23 in favor, 1 opposed. So back to you, Supervisor Veenstra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I now have, do I need to take up 119? Okay, I have item 1-19, a resolution regarding advisory referendum regarding the adoption of a county annual vehicle registration fee. Whereas,
I was just going to say this resolution failed in committee.
Right.
So that's Supervisor Veenstra's report, is that this failed in committee.
Thank you. And I don't move its approval.
Yeah. Right. So just a reminder back to an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago, when Dave walked us through the minority report. I don't know if anybody wants to bring this out on minority report now, given the vote that we just took on the indefinitely postponing the ordinance. Supervisor Burke.
I was going to defer to Supervisor Ebert, so I'm going to still continue to do that since.
So Supervisor Burke, just so everybody understands, Supervisor Burke was in the minority in executive committee. So she's keeping open the possibility of bringing forward a minority report. She's yielding the floor to Supervisor Ebert, who requested the resolution calling for the referendum. So just so everybody's, I feel like I'm in Sports Center here narrating the action, play-by-play action here, but I want to make sure everybody understands what's going on. So Supervisor Ebert, you have the floor if you so choose.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Burke. Even though this is postponed indefinitely, it still gives us, we still have an opportunity to get input. We always say we want input from our
So I'm just going to stop you. So you are wanting to ask for the minority report to be heard.
Oh, okay.
Is that
That's
what you're
I'm doing.
right?
Yeah,
We
I
need to
thought
do
I
that
got your
first
comment.
before we
Okay.
start.
Yes, I asked the minority report be heard.
Okay, so Supervisor Ebert is asking for the minority report to be heard. Remember, this is the, board education. I wasn't ever a teacher, but I just want to make sure we're all learning as we go along. So if you look at that minority report handout that Dave gave us, the majority report was nothing. It went to Supervisor Burke, who was the minority reporter, as the one yes vote in committee. She yielded it to Supervisor Ebert. So he wants the minority report to be heard. So I am asking, is there any objection to the minority report being heard? Anyone object? So seeing no objection, now we can move for the minority report to be heard. So Supervisor Ebert, if you would read the minority report.
Would you like a motion on the floor?
Absolutely, we need a motion.
Okay. I move that item 1-19 for the advisory referendum regarding adoption of a county annual registration fee be put on the floor.
And you just need to read the now.
Oh my God, I lied.
It'll be one of those 3 blue pieces of paper.
It was the last one, obviously. Now before there it resolved that La Crosse County Board hereby directs the county clerk place the question set forth below on the April 2015 ballot as an advisory referendum. Quote, should La Crosse County adopt an ordinance which provides for an annual county vehicle registration fee of $20 to be imposed on automobiles and motor trucks registered with the state and customarily kept in La Crosse County with a gross weight of not more than 8,000 pounds to be used for county transportation related purposes, end quote. Fiscal note, the estimated cost of the referendum for publication and potential printing expenses is from $1,000 to $3,000 depending on the final ballot layout. I move the resolution.
Supervisor Ebert moves approval of item 1-19 as a minority report coming out of Executive Committee, seconded by Supervisor Ferries. Discussion
May
on...
I retain the floor?
Yep, discussion on the resolution. Supervisor Ebert, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I always like to thank my colleagues for allowing the minority report. I appreciate it. Again, we always say we want input from our constituents, and this referendum is about as good as input as we can get. I believe that this is going to come up again at some time, and this input at a fairly reasonable cost would be very important for us to have at that time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Supervisor Burke yielded the floor to Supervisor Ebert, so do you wish to be heard next, Supervisor Burke?
No, Madam Chair.
Great. All right, so discussion on item 1-19. Supervisor Veenstra, then Supervisor Jerome, then Supervisor Papp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think this, we could probably just put something on the La Crosse Tribune front page with do you want to pay more taxes? And we know what the result would be. It'd be pretty likely that it would be no. But we have a higher duty than that, and we should do what we talked about earlier, which is analyze whether this is a really smart idea, whether it's an appropriate amount, get all the information from the sources that we can get it from, and make a decision and do our job. Given all the information, given the needs of the Highway Department, given our choices and priorities that we make, and our decision about whether we actually need these funds after we get the budget from the state regarding transportation. And I think this is just hard decision time, and why we get the big bucks, So I would be voting against spending money on a referendum that's just probably we all know the answer to. Thank you.
Supervisor Jerome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question concerns procedure, and I'm looking at the materials that Dave Lang handed out to us. It's on B4. It says in case of the county annual vehicle registration fee, and this is under advisory referendum, it would mean that the second reading of the ordinance would need to be deferred. Since we have postponed indefinitely the first reading of the ordinance, would we be having to not postpone indefinitely? I mean, to me, this is almost, I'm confused by, we've postponed the ordinance and now we're seemingly pulling it back out.
Are you wanting to make a motion, Supervisor Jerome?
I just want some clarification as to what this actually means to the indefinite postponement.
Go ahead, Dave.
I guess all I can say is that the other comment about continuing the second reading would be only if we were going to be looking at adopting this right after the referendum. You could have a referendum where you're not adopting it or even taking it up right afterwards just to get input from the public. So that's why it's still on.
I guess I concur with Supervisor Veenstra's kind of comments then about whether or not this is really necessary. Thank you.
Supervisor Paff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I agree with Mr. Veenstra also on this point that a referendum, we were elected by the people to gather the information so we can make it, to the best of our knowledge, a judgment call on things like this. And in order to get information out to our citizens, to our constituents, like Mr. O'Malley mentioned, it is hard to do. So I think really by putting it on a referendum, we are more or less passing the buck on what our responsibility is what we was elected to. So I will be voting against a referendum at this point.
Supervisor Geary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like the idea of a referendum, but I don't like the idea of a referendum if we haven't got an ordinance moving simultaneously to it. We postponed the other one indefinitely so we would know what the state did with their budget. So my motion on this is to postpone this, my amendment is to postpone it indefinitely.
Supervisor Geary's made a motion to postpone indefinitely consideration of this resolution. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Scheller. Back to you, Supervisor Geary.
Yeah. I like the idea of referendum, but only if we're not pursuing this, we'll have a good handle on it when we do the 2016 budget. If you want to go to referendum, you'll have an election that April. So the time sequence will work much better after we get more information.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to postpone the resolution indefinitely. So discussion on the Geary amendment, or the Geary motion to postpone indefinitely. Anybody wishing to be heard on postponement? Supervisor Hoffman.
I would simply like to remind this body that in the last year, we had 20 members of this board who voted in favor of putting a referendum on the ballot for the minimum wage, and to use Supervisor Veenstra's words, we all knew the outcome before it was on the ballot. And we had 22 members who voted to put the expansion of Medicare on the ballot, and again, we all knew the outcome. It was exactly as predicted. So for us to say putting something on the ballot because we know the outcome shouldn't happen, I'm okay with that as long as we don't do it again in the future. Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Supervisor Ebert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and this would just make it, that the soonest we could do this would be the next, well, I guess in theory, if there was a primary in February of 2016 would be the first time that this could come up, when there might be an election, unless we called a special election. So I still would, ask folks to defeat this and let us go to referendum this April. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely? On the computer, we're going to be voting tonight because it makes the clerk happy. So yes, if you are in favor of the motion to postpone indefinitely, no if you are opposed. Supervisor Geary's motion to postpone indefinitely has passed on a vote of 18 in favor, 6 opposed. Anything else on Executive Committee, Supervisor Veenstra, which is where I think all of this came from? Anything else from you? On to Health and Human Services Board, Supervisor Crosse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have for you item 1-21, resolution regarding opposition to State of Wisconsin Emergency Rule EMR 1417. Whereas this rule substantially changed Chapter NR 150 and the process to adopt the rule did not require notice, hearing, public input, or legislative review. And whereas Chapter NR 150 outlines the definitions, procedures, and criteria used by the DNR to consider the public health effects of certain industries known to emit pollutants to air, water, and soil. And, hold on one second. And whereas Emergency Rule 1417 added concentrated animal feeding operations, nutrient management plans, and land application sites and specifications for industrial facilities to the list of minor actions no longer requiring environmental analysis, now therefore be it resolved that the La Crosse County Board hereby opposes EMR 1417 and the changes it made to NR Chapter 150. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution shall be sent to Governor Walker, the Natural Resources Board, DNR Secretary Stepp, Senator Schilling, and State Representatives Doyle and Billings. There's no fiscal impact. It passed the Health and Human Services Board, and I move its approval.
Supervisor Crosse moves approval of the resolution, seconded by Supervisor Burke. Discussion on this item. Supervisor Hoffman.
I should know this because I sit on the committee that oversees the animal feeding operations, but how many CAFO operations do we have in La Crosse County?
Jim Steinhoff, are you able to answer that? So our Environmental Health Division Director, Jim Steinhoff.
I think there's one so far in the county.
Have we had any problems? Have we had any problems with that operation?
It depends what you mean by problems. Can you be more specific?
Has there been any complaints?
Yes.
Have we found them to be in violation of any regulations or ordinances?
At times, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Other discussion on the resolution. Supervisor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for whatever operations or the one operation we have now, I think we also are prudent to think about what operations might be created in the future. And I think there's been some problems recently in the state with a fairly large manure digester close to Madison that is a boondoggle, I think was quoted in today's Wisconsin State Journal, of significant issues regarding that operation. So I think it's prudent that we put the county and the rest of the counties in the state at a position to protect the health and welfare of our constituents, residents. Thank you.
Other discussion on the resolution. Anybody for a first time before I call on Supervisor Hoffman for a second time? Back to you, Supervisor Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question here now would probably be directed more towards Representative Doyle. He made a comment earlier when he and Supervisor Hampson were having a discussion that it would probably fall on deaf ears, but we should send the resolution up to Madison anyway. And I'm curious what his view of this resolution is, if it's going to fall on deaf ears or if it's going to do us some good.
I've had some correspondence today with Supervisor Crosse, thanking her for bringing this information to our attention. This is an issue that is going on right now in Madison between a couple of committees, the Natural Resources Committee, whose ranking member is in office right next to me, and the Joint Committee for Review of Administrative Rules, who I don't remember who the chair of that is, but this is very timely, and I think it is a logical thing to get to us at this point. This is one where it is the subject of debate, and input is important.
Any other discussion on the resolution? All those in favor of its approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. 1 no, Supervisor Logue. Anything else from you, Supervisor Cruz?
That's it.
Thank you. Future agenda items, suggestions. Anybody have any items for future agenda items? I think there are a number of issues coming from tonight's discussion. The obviously funding for road projects and all of the items that were raised as part of the vehicle registration fee discussion. I also think it would be helpful for probably executive committee to look at this issue of referendum questions in general and what is the excuse me. There were some concerns raised about the memo that Mr. O'Malley prepared for tonight, and that any topics stemming from that I think would be appropriate for executive committee to take up. Those are just off the top of my head. Anything else for a future agenda item? Mr. Geary.
Did we have a request for more information or that Ophelia's house? I thought somebody requested that a few months ago.
Yeah, I think it's on, I think we're planned for the March planning meeting. Ophelia's house will be on the March planning meeting. Anything else for future agenda items? If not, just a reminder, if you are interested in serving on whatever the name of the committee is that Supervisor Veenstra gave it, please complete that green form and get it back to me. And with that, Supervisor Hesse, did you want to make a motion? Yep, he does. Supervisor Hesse moves adjournment. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned with the thanks of the chair.